Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the screen that you first get to when you log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients that you added in. And so for today's session, it's going to be really open-ended. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to either unmute yourself and jump in with your question, or you can send it through the Zoom chat if that's easier. So today's session, I'm going to be taking you through a spouse client file from start to finish. And we're going to start over on the Documents tab. So you're going to have access to this tab if you're an admin on your account, and you can have as many admins on your account as possible. So if you make everyone an admin who's a user, then they will have access to everything in the system, all client files. If you want to restrict access, then you cannot make them an admin, and they'll only have access to the files that they're marked as a primary or secondary contributor on. So if you are an admin and you have access to the Documents tab, this is where you can set all of your document preferences, specifically the default settings and the fonts. So you have to do it for each document type, but let's just say we're going to do single will. Everything at the top is something that you can change later on. So these are just where you're setting your defaults. On the client level, you'll still be able to decide whether or not you want it included. Definitions, this is a new feature where you can now customize which definitions you want to appear in the will. So this is kind of our step towards custom templates. So you just check off the button, click the button on whether you want it included or not. But again, you'll still be able to change this on the client level. Witnesses, you can pick anyone who's a user on your account. Name options, this is only available on this Documents tab. So there's a couple of things. The first is nicknames. So if you want the individual to be referred to their first name or their nickname in the will, you can choose to include nicknames. So then, for example, if the individual is called John Collins, after it'll say John Collins once, then it'll refer to them as John. Relationships is new as well. So you can now decide whether or not you want the relationship associated with the individual in the system. So you can have it the first time only. So it can be my brother, John Collins. You can include it always throughout the document, or you can exclude it. So that's a new feature that people are very excited about. You can also have the names capitalized and bolded throughout the will if you put those settings here. Footer options, this is if you want the date and the file path included in the footer of the document. So most commonly it's used in counterparts, so that way you know you're signing the exact same copy of the document when you're doing that counterpart signing, but you can also include it all the time, or you can never include it. And then you've got your fonts and font size and all of that stuff. So you can choose whatever font you like your documents to come out in, and you can set that here. So every single will you generate for any client is going to come out with these settings. So now we're going to go back over to the Clients tab, and we're going to add our first client. So just go to the Add button. The key fields are first name and last name, just to make sure that you're able to add the client to the system. You can put the middle name, but it's not a required field. Email, this is if you want to send the individual the online questionnaire. So you'd put in their email, you'd click this Use Questionnaire box, and then when you go to add the individual to the system, you're going to get a prompt as to how you want the questionnaire sent. So either directly from eState Planner, or you can copy a special link that you can send to the client from your own email. And that way you can kind of customize the email a bit more, and it looks like it's coming from you. So you choose one of those options, and then the client gets an email. They click the link to access their questionnaire. They're prompted to create a password just so that their information stays secure and so that they don't have to do it all in one setting. And then they go through and enter in their profile, family tree, asset, and debt information. And anything they put in that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate back into your system. So it can save a lot of time on the manual entry, but you don't have to use our questionnaire. So if you don't want to use the online questionnaire, don't worry about putting in the email and don't click the Use Questionnaire box. And then you can use your own PDF questionnaire, or maybe you like to collect the information live in the client meeting, and you can just go ahead and add the client in normally. So today, since we're doing a spouse client file, this means we want to do wills for both spouses. And in order to do that, you need to add both spouses as separate clients in the system, and then you can link them together using the spouse client function. The easiest way to add the spouse is to just go to the three dots on the side of the first spouse that you added and just click Add Spouse. And then you can put in the spouse's first name and last name. And the key field for that spouse client linking is this spouse client field. So you're going to want to make sure that the name of the first spouse is clicked off on this list to make sure that they're linked together, which means that any joint asset information, any shared family tree information will automatically be synced between the two. And you also got the opportunity to sync all of these scenarios and appointments together if it's going to be more of a mirror will plan. Then you just pick who you're going to start with. So I'm going to pick Ben. And this is what the family tree is going to look like if you haven't sent the client the questionnaire, or if you have, but the client hasn't filled anything out yet. So you're going to start with the client, who's always going to be surrounded with a black circle, just to remind you who the client is compared to everyone else. And then anyone else on the family tree, if you're clicked on them, they'll be surrounded in blue. So the client will always be on black. It'll be black bolded if you're clicked on them. Anyone else will be blue bolded if you're clicked on them. So that way you know who you're clicked on and who you're adding to. But usually what I like to do first is edit the client's information. So I just do that by double clicking right on the client's icon. It's going to bring up all of these details. And really the key fields are first name, last name, gender. Also known as is the same as other legal names. So Ben's also known as Benny Collins. You could put that in. And for the client, this other legal names field will populate in the will. Date of birth, you can pick it from the calendar, but I find it easier to just type it in and it will automatically calculate the age for you. You can do country of birth, you can do citizenship. All of this other information is good to have on your client, but it's not going to affect the generation of the will. It's just making sure you're doing that adequate investigation for the information on your client. Residency for the client is important because however you set the province as here is how the system's going to know to calculate the probate tax on the assets tab. And the city field is also important because it will populate in the will. So it'll say Ben Collins of the city of Toronto. Special circumstances for the client is a place where you can note any potential capacity issues. So you just click it off and you'd write a description just to make sure you're getting that kind of stuff well documented. And then relationships. This is more of a list as to who the client's related to. But it's also a place you can go to fix a relationship. So if, for example, a niece has been added as a sibling by accident, you can use this section to sort of remove the relationship and re-add it under the correct relationship. But you should only use this section to fix incorrect relationships. When you're just adding people normally, just do it back on the normal add tab. So don't do it here. This is just for fixing. Next, let's say you wanted to add a child. So whoever it's going to be bolded around is who I'm adding to. So I'll just say I'm adding to Lauren. Whenever you're adding a child to the system, you're going to get this prompt as to who the other parent is. So if it's Ben Collins, the current spouse, if it's a new parent, so an ex-spouse that is going to be involved in the will, so you do want to add them to the family tree, or a single parent. So either they're genuinely a single parent or it's an ex-spouse that isn't going to be involved. So you don't need to add them into the system. So you've got those three options. We're going to just say it's Ben. And then you can enter in the individual's information. So I'm going to say John Collins. Now you have this nickname field, as I talked about before on the Documents tab. If you've enabled nicknames, then it will refer to John Collins as John throughout the will, unless I put a different name in this nickname. If it's Johnny instead, then it will refer to Johnny throughout the will. Let's say date of birth, June 19th, 2000. Then if we scroll all the way down to special circumstances, this place for anyone else on the family tree is a place you can note sort of estrangement, relationship difficulties to the client to make sure you're getting that really well documented. But most importantly in this list is the disability function. So if the individual has a disability, you're going to want to make sure to check that off so that the system's able to pick up on that. And later on, when you're in the scenarios section, you're creating a fully discretionary trust to the death of the beneficiary, then the system's going to know to draft a special Henson trust clause in the will. So this is a key here to make sure that the individual is clicked off as having a disability in the special circumstances. Next, let's say you wanted to add a grandchild. So you can't just do it directly to the client. What you have to do is first add a child, click on the child's icon, and add a child to the child. Let's say John's a single parent, and that's how you would get the grandchild's information into the will. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You would click on the client, add a sibling to the client, click on the sibling, and add a child to the sibling. So it all works through direct relationships. But if there's going to be anybody else involved in the will in a beneficiary or a trustee capacity, and they don't fit on the family tree, you can go to this All People tab, and it's going to list everyone that you've added into the system. And it's also going to allow you to add in people that aren't family. So you just go up to the Add button, and then first name, last name. Let's say Jordy's going to be involved in this will later on, so we want to make sure we get his information in the system. So all this kind of stuff is similar, and then you just go add, and then it will ask you about the relationship. So who is Jordy related to? Jordy's related to Ben. And what's the relationship? Jordy is a friend of Ben's. So now later on, when we're picking beneficiaries or appointing trustees, we're going to be able to choose Jordy as one of the options. So that is the People tab. Are there any questions so far? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going. Next is assets. So this is where you're going to list all the different assets that your client has. You're always going to start with the general personal effects, just to remind you to gift it to someone in the will, because it's going to trigger a special disposition of personal effects clause. For any other assets, you can add in all the client's assets and value them, give them a good sense of what their state's looking like at this point in time. But really for the will generation itself, the only assets that you need to add in this section are those that are going to be specific asset bequests or registered assets that you want to confirm or do new designations for in the will. So to add any assets, you just go to the Add button. You pick sort of your category and then your type. And really for any asset that you're adding in, the key field is really the asset name field. You're going to want to rename this to however you want the asset referred to throughout the system and in the will if it does end up being a specific asset bequest. You want to sort of put all the identifying information in that asset name field so that if you're adding in multiple bank accounts, for example, they're not all going to be called bank account or bank account copy, because then it's going to be confusing as to which is which. But if you know this is the RBC bank account, the other is the CIBC savings account, then you're going to be able to differentiate them accordingly and make sure you're planning for the correct asset. You don't have to put a balance or value in, but if you do, it's going to make the graphic scenario summary look a lot nicer, and it also automatically calculates the prorate tax for you according to what you've set the client's residency as. Let's go next to real estate and we'll go home. So again, you can change that asset name. Maybe this is the family home. If it is going to be a specific asset bequest, this address field will populate in the will. Let's say the current value is $1 million. You have this mortgage/encumbrances field whenever you're adding in property. And what you want to do here is put the value of the mortgage in, because the next section, debts, there's also an opportunity to add a mortgage in there. But if it's associated with a specific asset that you're adding into the system, it's better off to put it in this field here instead of adding it as a separate debt on the debts tab. because not only is it good to know what asset the debt is associated with, but also it has an effect on how much probate tax is calculated for this asset. So really the key thing is make sure you're not adding it in both places because it will double count it. But best practice is don't put it on the debts tab and put it in this mortgage/encumbrances field instead. Then ownership, we can say it's jointly owned with Lauren, the spouse. And then this family home asset will appear in her list of assets as well. Let's do one more. We'll go for an RRSP. Again, I'm going to put the key information in that asset name field. Beneficiary, this is whoever the current beneficiary is on the policy. So later on, you'll be able to decide if you want to confirm or do a new designation. This field here is just strictly for information purposes for the profile summary. Current value, let's say it's 100,000. So you're going to notice that the probate tax always automatically calculates for you, but the income tax doesn't. And that's just due to the variability of different clients' tax brackets. So what we usually like to do is estimate the highest possible tax that the asset could incur. So for something like an RRSP, we put in 50% of it. For an asset with a capital gain, we do like 25% of that gain, just to show clients sort of the highest possible tax that they could be looking at potentially. So that's the assets tab. Any questions here? Nope, we'll keep going. Debts is really more for planning. We're not going to put in a mortgage. Let's just say there's a credit card of 5,000. Then we'll go to scenarios. So this is really the key part of the system. It's where all the planning occurs. And the idea is, depending on your client's situation, you're going to go through at most each of these 3 scenarios and create a plan so that you're covering your bases no matter what happens. So you start with surviving spouse. This is the plan when the spouse is still alive once the client's passed. Then descendants only. So no client, no spouse, but there's kids or grandkids around. And then lastly, no descendants is like your ultimate disaster. No clients, no spouse, no kids, no grandkids. Who's it going to? And there's 2 ways you can go about planning. You can click into a scenario and you can go through each of the 3 sections. So there's the joint designated assets section, which is where you're going to put anything that's joint or designated to another individual to show that it's falling outside of the estate. There's initial gifts, which is where you're going to create specific asset bequests or cash legacies. And then there's the balance of the estate, which is dividing up the residue, either by adding gifts or by running a macro if it's a common residue breakdown. So you can go about doing that through it manually. But a faster way to do it is, it's a more of a typical client situation, is to use this little lightning bolt up in the top corner that we call E-plans. So what E-plans are basically like giant macros that go through the scenarios and appointment sections for you and create a plan, depending on which one you select. And the nice thing about it is it's not like it's set in stone. So if it matches basically the outline of one of these, you can always go into each scenario and manually make any changes so that it matches the details that you want. But this will just give you a nice starting point so you're not starting from scratch. So let's say I want to run this one. Still in the surviving spouse scenario, it's shown me that in the joint designated asset section, it's given the RRSP and family home to Lauren to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, it's given the general personal effects to Lauren because this is going to trigger that special disposition of personal effects clause. It's going to come up in the will. And then the balance of the estate is going to Lauren, absolute, 100%. There's no gift over because the second scenario will be our gift over. This is an absolute gift. We don't need to put anything here. So this looks good. I don't need to make any changes. Also, another feature, if you want to click on this summary bar, it's going to show you sort of the breakdown of the scenario in terms of numbers and taxes saved and what's going where. So that's a nice little feature too. But this scenario looks good. I don't need to change anything that the E-plan did. This is exactly what I would have wanted to do. So I can move to the descendants only scenario. So here in initial gifts, it's given the general personal effects to the class of children. let me just show you how you do it manually if you had to. So for any specific asset bequest, you're just going to drag and drop the green box over. And then you're going to decide your beneficiaries. I'm going to pick the class of children. And anytime you're gifting to more than one individual for the personal effects, you're going to get this distribution method section as to how you want those personal effects distributed. So you can choose multiple. I'm just going to pick trustee's discretion. Then the balance of the estate, we're going to click on the gift, children, trust, 100%, same trustees as executors. The duration is when the beneficiary reaches age 30, but I want to change it to 25 instead. Mandatory payments, I want to say at 21, they get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over first to beneficiaries issue, then to the other class members. So I'll save that. And now what I've done is I've worked off of the E-plan, but I changed the details so it's ultimately the trust that I wanted to create. So it just saved me a lot of time so I didn't have to start from scratch. And if I want this descendants only scenario to be copied over to Lauren's will as well, so that Lauren's descendants only scenario is the same, I can sync this little button up in the top corner and it's going to copy over the residue breakdown, anything that's joint between the two over to Lauren's descendants only scenario. The only thing it won't copy over are any solely owned assets because Ben's solely owned assets aren't Lauren's to give away in her will. Then I'll go to the last scenario, no descendants. So the E-plan has given half to siblings, half to spouse's siblings. Technically, I can just clear it and leave it at that. I don't need to necessarily create a plan for this scenario if maybe I have a big family, don't think it's ever going to get to this point. But let's say I do want to create a plan. I want to give half to Jordy and half to a charity. So I'll start by adding a gift. I'm going to pick Jordy. I'm going to change the percent to 50%, and I'll put in a gift over to his issue. And I'll add that in. So now I've dealt with 50%, but I have to deal with the other 50%. I'm going to add another gift. This time I'm going to go for a charity. And if you search the search bar, it'll search the CRA database for you. So I'm going to pick Epilepsy Toronto. If I click on this eye, I can see it comes with the registration number as well. Absolute 50%, and I'll add. So now half goes to Jordy and half goes to the charity. And if Lauren wants the same for hers, I can sync it over to her will as well. So that's the scenarios question, or section, sorry. Are there any questions here? No, okay, we'll keep going. Next is appointments. So here's where you appoint your estate trustees or your guardians. Because we already ran the E-plan, it's made Lauren the primary estate trustee. To add anyone else, you just go to the add button. You can do people or trust corporations and their specific clauses will populate. I'm going to pick Jordy. And then you set a condition. So none will make them a primary. And if you put a condition, it'll make them an alternate. And usually the condition I use is if all specified cannot act. And then I make sure the name on the specified line is correct. So it's going to read Lauren. If Lauren can't act, Jordy. Maybe I wanted to do a further alternate. I'm going to pick the same condition, but I'm going to change the name on the specified line. So now it's going to read Lauren if Lauren can't, Jordy if Jordy can't, John. And I can sync this over in the top corner. The last thing we're going to go over today is provisions. So there's a couple of things here. The first is funeral arrangements. So if you type them in the line, it's going to populate in the will. If not, just get rid of this text and there won't be a body disposition clause in the will. Include future members is if you're using classes in the will, like we use the class of children in that second scenario, this is where you can decide if you want future members of that class included in the definition. So if I check this box, it's going to define children as John Collins and any of the child born to or adopted by me and my spouse. Same kind of thing for class restrictions. You can restrict certain members of being part of a class. This is your general trust for beneficiaries under a certain age that's going to govern underage beneficiaries who haven't set up specific trusts for in the will. If you want to forgive loans from anyone, you can choose who you want to forgive loans from. And then if you're doing multiple wills, primary and secondary, you can pick and choose which definitions you want included in the secondary will. If you're just doing a single will, you don't have to worry about checking or unchecking. The last two things we're not going to go into today are just financial and personal care powers of attorney, and they work the same way as the appointments section, where you're picking your primaries and your alternates. Then up in the top corner, this little circle with the exclamation point or advisor insight. So they're like contextual alerts that help to advise you of anything that you've missed in the system, any important planning things to consider. Some of them will go away, like if I went and put a gender in, this would disappear from the list, but some of them will always remain, and it's just a good resource to check before you generate to make sure you're not missing anything important. Beside that is just notes. You can make notes on your client here, and they appear at the end of the text summary. And then you've got your download button. So there's documents and summaries. First of all, the three summaries. The profile summary is basically all the information that the clients filled out in the questionnaire or that you filled out for them. So all the people on the family tree, all their profile details, all the assets and debts as well. And this can be good to give to the client after the planning meeting so that they can review that information and make sure that spelling of names and asset details are correct. Then you've got your graphic scenario summary. So it's a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios. And if you're putting in values on the assets tab, it's going to look a lot nicer and it's going to give you a better sense of what's going where. Now the last one is the text scenario summary. So it's a nice sort of in-depth the details of everything. So who are your trustees? Who are your powers of attorney? What gifts have you created? How have you divided up the residue? It's basically the will without the legalese. It's just got all the details. Those are the summaries. Then these are all the different documents you can generate. We're going to do single will today. There's a couple of things. You can always change the signing date. Registered asset designation is if you want to confirm or do new designation for the registered assets in the will. Joint designated asset confirmation is basically something that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held on resulting trust. Counterpart is if you're signing in counterpart. Simplified is a shorter definition or shorter will with less definitions and powers, but it's not as short as the short will, which is much more simple. This is more similar to the single will. It's just got less definitions and powers. The will guide is a nice little chart at the end of the will, and a cover page is just a cover page. Then you just click generate, and it's going to give you a Word document that is fully editable, so you can make any changes that you want. This is the cover page here. Then if we scroll down a little bit, I can go through the will briefly just to give you a sense of what it looks like. But this is a Word document, so any clauses that you don't like, any changes that you need to make, you can make it because it's fully editable. So you can make any changes that you want. Funds and plans is if you click the registered asset box. Assets passing outside of the will is if you click the joint asset box. Here's our definitions. My children means John and any other child born to, because we click that future children box on the provisions tab. Here's our executors. So Lauren, if not Lauren, Jordy, if not Jordy, John. Here's the funeral arrangement. Here's the special disposition of personal effects clause that generates when you gift the general personal effects as an initial gift. And here's the residue. First to Lauren, if not to Lauren, then children. And then ultimately half to Jordy, half to Epilepsy Toronto. And if we scroll all the way down, we're going to get to our nice little will guide that guides the client to the different clauses in the will. So before we wrap up, I just want to point out one other thing is this little question mark button up in the top corner. So if you click on it, it's going to bring you over to our help desk. And it's got lots of articles on how to do everything in the system. It also has courses, specifically the eState Planner certification course. It's free, it's self-paced, and it's designed to help you to get to know the software a bit better. So I'd recommend checking it out if you're trying to get to learn the software in more depth. But that about wraps it up for today. Does anyone have any final questions before we go? Okay, well, if you do come across anything later on, don't hesitate to reach out. We're always here to help. You can email me directly, you can email support, and someone will be happy to jump on a Zoom and walk you through things. But thanks again for joining me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.